Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the official Oscarina nomination coverage for ActRaiser. ActRaiser is an action fantasy platformer developed by Quintet and published by Enix. It was released on the Super Nintendo in 1990 in Japan and in 1991 in the US. My name is Mitchell, and I'll be your host for the evening. Here with me is fellow Oscarina voter Tyler. Tyler, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
In ActRaiser, you play the Master, which is really just shorthand for God. And as God, you direct your people to grow their population, hear their woes, and periodically inhabit an avatar statue to personally rout out hordes of evil. Loyal to the story's antagonist, Tanzra, or the devil. It's Satan, basically. Yeah, might as well get the...
It's a little overt in its themes.
It is, yeah. May as well just get the elephant in the room out of the way. The translation was just Tanzra and the Master and all this other nonsense. And in the original, it's like, yeah, you're God, it's Satan. That's the theme. So we're getting all religious on you for this episode.
Do you mean the translation from the original Japanese release? Like, that was how they got it.
Yeah, because in Japan, they didn't have, they were like, sure, that's fine, whatever, you can work with the religious themes. But when it came to the US port, there was tons of translation. Anyways, so this one probably had the worst of it, lots of translations, but it's still the same story, same thing, and intact. So it's an unusual blend of elements, but before we get into that, let's take a look at its nominations. So it is up for 4 awards, including Best Pixel for 1990, Best Direction, Best Interface, and Best Narrative Composition.
All right, so you want to tell me a little bit about the direction then? Let's start there.
Yeah, so the way the story is conveyed, it's through your worshippers asking you for help all the time. And it actually helps create this like narrative dissonance almost between you and your subjects that really does work in the game's favor. I remember the first time I played this, it was back in college, and I was sort of prepping for a theoretical award ceremony, and so this was one of the games that came up in my research, and so I played it, and I remember not being super satisfied with like the whole thing. Not that the game was bad, but that it was just so melancholy and like disconnected, like emotionally from what was going on. But now I kind of see it as a positive because it's like you're God, and so your perspective on the woes of these subjects is very different. Even the ways it goes to like stress this, like your subjects speak to you when they're like on their knees in like a darkened room in an altar, and you just so empowered the whole time, and they're like, "Oh, please help us." And it's just, there's so many games where they're like, oh, you're so great, you're the hero. But like in this, it's like, you are that great. I mean, you're God.
Yeah, it kind of has like a Greek mythology feel to it, where maybe not necessarily fueled by the praises and things, but it gives you the perspective you'd have if you actually were in that situation. I didn't know you played it in college. I thought that this was your first interaction with the thing, but it's definitely, it's extremely unique. For sure, because I full disclosure, I have not played it myself, but I had the distinct pleasure of watching you a couple different times. I watched you stream, and then I remember I went over to your house, and I forgot what it was that I was working on.
It was like killing the bosses at the end. I think I okay.
It was very dramatic for sure, but it didn't make sense visually to me at first, because I was like, wait, are you? I thought you were playing another game, because initially you're playing the cherub and you're like floating, and it has this top-down view, and you see these little like dots running around. And at first I was like, what is that? And you were like, those are the people that worship you. And you're like fending off these demons, and it was very strange, because then you jump into these different modes that play like entirely different games later, but we'll get into that.
Well, yeah, actually, to kind of give a brief overview of that, I would say that's one of the more unique elements of this game, and it's kind of a factor of the direction, the interface, and even the narrative to some extent. And it's that you have a Sims-like civilization building section of the game where you're like building up your population and you're telling them where to go, and so they're constructing, and it's very slow and just kind of relaxing. But then like a portion of that experience, like you say, has like these demons and things attacking you, and they're trying to like abduct your people, and like you can see them like pick them up and carry them away. I don't know if I'm gonna have too much footage of that because I'm on those demons. Like I don't like them taking away my people. I get really upset. It's like causes like internal anxiety.
Got a little emotionally invested in the game there.
Yeah, you watch them like a hawk. That's what you feel like. You just like mother bear over like their little subjects.
That was what Corbett put in there. It was this quote he has: "You see houses destroyed and people carried off, but you don't get most of the gruesome details. And since your game is operating on a grand time scale, you often see the civilization recover and the new people become born in what seems like a short amount of time." So it's this like microcosm happening underneath you, and you're just kind of trying to infect it, or you're trying to impact where you can, whether it's fending off these demons or helping these people build, or like providing sunlight or whatever. But for the most part, you're kind of just like, oh, I guess 1,000 years has passed. You're just kind of like, oh well, hope I got what I needed out of that.
Yeah, exactly. You're just kind of you're all function as a god. You're just like, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and like you have all the right answers. Like from the beginning of the game, they're just like, what do we do? And you're like, oh, well, we're gonna do this. Go build here, and it's like, oh, of course, master.
It's Your Highness or God, please, thank you.
Yes, yeah, of course.
And it's interesting because you like to go on through that, like to expand on that point, you go through the life of that god where you get to see your people taken by these monsters. So like going back through what Corbett was talking about, and you're going through all these events, like people are dying and they're rebelling, and but after a time, or you know what you perceive as time in this game, you're an existential being, and these earthly concerns are they're only so impactful, you know, like you're kind of like vaguely aware of them almost. So, but I mean, to quote Corbett again, the game manages to strike a delicate balance between making you feel sad, yet somewhat removed from the deaths of your civilization's inhabitants. And so, what did he say? It's a mixture of melancholy and power. Like you have this godly feeling, but at the same time, you're like, I don't want all my people to die. But at the same time, you kind of like you're accepting it because all this time is passing, and it's just kind of a part of life as they experience it, which is the way that you created it. So it's weird. It's the weird visual representation of how this works.
You know, this might be kind of a good way to kind of surmise what that emotion is, because I've wrestled with it for years, like ever since first playing it, just being like, what the hell was that? But I think it's because you are not a god. You know, when you're playing this game, you are a human, and so you do feel bad, even though they're just like these little pixelated guys walking around. You know, they're just like on their knees and they feel so bad, and you're like, oh no, and you're trying to care for them, but like the game is designed in such a way to put you in a position of complete like disassociation from those things, and then you're like, why are you doing that, game? And then
but your human nature is like fighting you. It's like,
right,
that's not how we view this.
Yeah,
that's someone's mother.
Omnipotent deity. It does not matter.
And he talks a little bit about that later with some of the nuances and the stories you get from the villages, which play into that point. We'll get to that, though.
Yeah, we'll get to that with the narrative. One thing I do want to cover in direction here is that the flow of the game is this. You start off, you go into a side-scrolling sequence where you're hacking and slashing and platforming, and you're inhabiting this statue. So you basically cast your soul down to inhabit this statue, and you go through, you kill all the monsters, and then the area is like safe to live in. And so then your population starts growing and producing, but when they do that, the area is still not completely routed out. And so then you have your little cherub, your little angel assistant, and then it's like a top-down shooter, and you're going around and you're killing the monsters that still inhabit the land. Once you've eradicated them, in the process, you're kind of building up your civilization, you're killing these monsters, you're protecting your people. And then at some point you do find all the layers and you route them all out, and then it goes into that real chillaxed SimCity effect. So it's just very interesting that it has 3 very different genres put into one, and it all seamlessly works together. Like when you're done with a side-scrolling stage, it's kind of like, oh, that was refreshing, that was action-packed, and then it's like, oh, now I got to make sure my people are doing well here, and so then you got to defend them, but it's kind of stressful there, and then you route out all the enemies, and you're like, okay, ooh, now it's safe, and then you take your time, and then you just keep constructing, and then you talk to them, you listen to their concerns. Sometimes they give you things, they'll give you like an offering, and it's just kind of like, life continues on. And it's able to create that impression. It's definitely the longer sequences when you're there doing the top down stuff, but it just makes the side scrolling stuff that much more impactful.
It's also interesting because it plays into the theme where, you can kind of do whatever you want, but it also
Yeah.
breaks the monotony on a gameplay level because you get to experience multiple different types of gameplay within the same one.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses the theme to allow that to happen without it being too jarring. I think that's a pretty interesting thing to do on a game creator level, without breaking the immersion, as it were. Because, it's like playing Call of Duty and then all of a sudden, you jump in. And I mean, some of them do that actually, where you jump out and you can like be in a drone or something and you're dropping missiles or whatever. But it's kind of like that because it's like they're very different types of games, but it's not solely one or the other, to make sure that it's not monotonous and you're not just constantly floating above these people's heads as a cherub. And like there is something interesting about it because you're helping them build their civilization and you're doing certain things to aid them in whatever way, like adding the sunlight or creating rain or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe an earthquake here and there because you just want to instill the fear of God into them or something. But then and then you jump in and you're like, all right, now I can play a side scroller where I'm actually playing like a Castlevania style game.
Yeah.
And it makes it more engaging.
Well, and there's actually a good detail in there that I'd actually forgotten about. But like when you cast like lightning, for example, if you cast it on like a farmland, like it'll incinerate the crops. Or like if you have people there, it will like kill them. So like it quite literally it functions exactly as, and like it was your doing. And so it's almost like, in those stories where they're like, oh, God's displeased with us because he struck down like whoever it was, or like,
and you're just up there accidentally clicking buttons. Oops.
Yeah. But it's really great how it'll just like, it actually takes that into account. This game actually has, curiously enough, it has the highest rating for best direction, or like the highest potential. I don't know what I'm calling that yet, but basically, when you in order to get nominated, we basically just you cast in your top 5 picks for the category, and depending on what place you put them at, they get a certain number of points. And the higher you rank them, the more points they get, right? And then what we do is we just take the games with the top 5 highest like point games they get on the list. And ActRaiser actually has the highest of everybody, which I think is interesting because it doesn't have a lot of nominations. It's only got the 4. Where it does have, it has like really strong positions in them. And so a lot of the comments we're going to be bringing up are coming from Corbett, the mini chairman, as well, because obviously it was a big pick for him. So I'm going to read off actually one of the quotes he has. He says, the narrative helps give the gameplay more tangible stakes and makes you more invested in your success. This causes you to try harder with the gameplay and feel more triumphant when you succeed. For example, I would not have cared nearly as much if demons attacking my civilization just caused my score to go down, in comparison to seeing them carry off my poor little villagers. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Like, it's weird how it taps into your like emotional instincts as a human being, even though you're supposed to be God.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Because then, I mean, it does have to reconcile with the fact that it is still a game. And so you're still wanting the experience of playing a game, even though it's kind of playing into these themes that seem to transcend them in a more philosophical sense. But, we won't get into that too much.
Yeah. It's a super ambitious project. It's not the kind of thing that you see very much. I mean, really, even today, like, there's not a lot of games that are like ActRaiser. It's just got a very interesting premise.
Well, and one wonders if it's even, I wouldn't say possible, but likely that something like that would be made today. It seems like something that could only exist in the time that it did.
Yeah, maybe. Quintet is a really interesting developer. They were kind of a team pulled together from a bunch of different Square Enix other divisions. and they basically put them together so that they can make Super Nintendo games. And this was their
Hmm.
first project, and they're kind of, at least in terms of like Super Nintendo games, they're pretty well known because all of their games are like fascinating. They're just these weird, like artistic sort of forays into just different ideas, different gameplay mechanics. And so they really knocked it out of the park with this one. And there's definitely going to be, I'm sure we can expect to see more of them in future ceremonies. But yeah, that'll be for another conversation.
Right. And they're a Japanese company, correct? And that's how they
Yeah.
started over there. Okay.
Hmm. I was gonna say they had skills from other games that they had worked on previously as a group for whatever reason. I mean, it makes me really curious what the studio environment looked like because there was clearly an openness to just really different and innovative ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, and it was an interesting way of like providing some of those questions again when you're jumping into the more meta, like what is it like to play as a god, and
Yeah.
what type of emotions does that evoke, especially since you aren't one and you're playing one and you have these human emotions and things.
Yeah.
But it provided them, all kinds of avenues of um, throwing in different themes and different religious backgrounds because this doesn't really rely on one. It obviously has some parallels to, like the I guess a more biblical Christian view with a god and the devil and
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
demons and things, but it like plays more like a Greek type mythology. Like it's
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
like you're
Yeah.
playing Zeus essentially,
Hmm.
as if Zeus had an avatar that was a statue, and it's a very interesting look on like just that view, that religious type view in general, and how the relationship between a deity and a people works while
Yeah.
also, allowing a good, interesting game experience.
Yeah. It's got all kinds of religious backgrounds that it pulls from, and it just kind of uses them liberally because the theme is not like
Right.
it's not like a comment on like one particular religion. It's more like you said, it's that relationship between like people and their deities, and especially when you're going like old school, because this is like a medieval fantasy setting, and
Right.
so it gives it that kind of more
It's like an
ancient
80s
style.
Camelot kind of feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
thing about it is that the interesting thing about that is that, most of those stories, like if you're watching a movie or a game or something, most of those are viewed from the human perspective. And it's often very nebulous how you understand the gods, right? Like you get a thunderstorm and you praise Zeus or something.
Hmm.
When you play in this game, it's flipped. It's you're now the god and you're kind of from this top view looking at the people and
Yeah.
how they perceive you. And like I was saying earlier, you might have accidentally pushed a button which threw a lightning bolt into their crop field or something, and they're like, "Oh, he's displeased." And typically you would see, the inverse of that. You'd see the people, the lightning hitting, and now we have to deal with the
Hmm.
fact that we're guessing that he's displeased, so we have to find out why. On this side, you're like, oh, I'm the god, and I just accidentally threw this lightning bolt into these people's, and I'm just watching them
Whoops.
try to deal with it and fix it.
Right. You're like, going through the menu trying to like cast rain down to put out the fire as fast as possible.
And then a demon shows up somewhere on the other side of the map, so you're like, oh, I have to take care of this. I'll be right back.
Well, yeah, you have these grander concerns almost. It's like,
Right.
look, I can't be bothered with you guys' problems all the time. Like, I want to be compassionate, but also I'm trying to protect you here. I got a lot on my plate.
Yeah, it's an interesting view. It was a fun one just to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. So I think to kind of close out our thoughts on direction, it's very, very well paced. Is the other thing I think is important to bring up, and that like I said, the sort of sim building, that sequence is much longer than this sort of side scrolling action platforming, but I mean it's good. It works. It kind of they don't need to be in equal measured.
Right.
Because yeah, I think the novelty is really coming out through that Sim City building thing. Um, and the benefit of having the side scrolling is that it can like bring you closer into what's going on with your people in the world, especially if like you have frustrations building up with some of the enemies that you're dealing with. Like some of them get pretty annoying, and so you just kind of like you go cast down to the planet and you're like, all right, time to like mess stuff up. So I think I'll transition us into maybe talking about the interface a little bit. And so we have three sort of modes of play, but there's also three different interfaces, you could say. The first is that you have the Sky Palace, and this is broken up into two screens, one of which you're talking with your little cherub individually. And that's really good because they will actually explain things to you. So like the interface is full of like little icons to show what something is, but when you click on it, oftentimes they will provide an explanation of what that does. And they're just like, oh, like I'm happy you're awake. Like, are you ready to get to work? Like, oh yeah, this is how this works. Like, are you sure you'd like to do that? And it feels very like formal, and like they just have utmost reverence for you. But the other cool thing it does is that when you're in the Sky Palace, you can flip to a screen where you can kind of see the whole map of the world, and you just float around in this cloud. And as each area like develops and expands and the landscape changes as a result of like the things that you cast down and also just your guidance, you actually see that reflected on that overhead map. So you go down 3 layers. You have, that global perspective, and then you shoot down onto the planet and you kill a bunch of monsters, and then you kind of pull out a little bit and you help everybody manage their little province, and then you pull back up to your Sky Palace and you see all the landscape and how it's changed and adjusted as a result of all that. So it's just really, really nice that that's there.
Yeah, and I had, like I said, I had not played it per se, but from what I had viewed, and then from the comments I was reading from Corbet's, I guess, argument, for lack of a better term, was that it's extremely intuitive on how to convey that. He even said he barely referenced the manual when he was jumping in there, but
yeah,
it was very easy to determine how to control the things that you could. Casting lightning, rain, earthquake, sunshine were the things that he was saying that he could do, and it was very easy to determine how to do it, and then how it helped you was the other thing, was how it played into the game and what those did for you when you did use them.
mm-hmm.
And it was all very it was quick and easy to access. Like, you boot up the game, you jump in, and it was like, okay, cool. It understood right away what you needed to do and how.
Yeah, and actually, one of the other things he sort of mentioned in that, at the time, similar games would have been like SimCity and Populous. And I've played both of those on their Super Nintendo ports. At least I think I've played both of them on Super Nintendo ports. I know I didn't have a lot of patience for them because I don't really like simulation games, and I'm not very good at them. And it's just it's just a lot of controls, a lot of buttons, a lot of like, okay, wait, what does this do? How does that work? I just don't really have a mind for it. But those games were coming from PC, and so these were ports of them. And so they had to go through, a huge transition of figuring out, okay, how do we get this down? And just a controller with 6-button strategy, basically.
And a lot of, well, I mean, to be fair, a lot of that, The Sims, is you're, essentially living this other life. Whereas this one, you're kind of setting things up to where they're automated to an extent.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of prompted as well. So it's as long as you're floating above the correct province, you can give that population wheat, for instance, or medicine, or and you don't need to interact with them too much or find where the correct menu is. Like you said, it's within those controls to kind of prompt you into that, and then from there, they'll harvest it, or they'll go to the temple to pray, or it'll be handled by the game's AI as it existed at the time.
Yeah, so it was really just smart. Okay, we're building this from the ground up. It's going to be on Super Nintendo. We know that for a fact. And we need to make this simulation process really, really smooth. And it's fantastic. I think in the stream, I had like this hiccup where I was struggling to figure out what to do. But that was totally on me. I just didn't think to go and like talk to my subjects, so that probably says something bad about me as a potential like.
You didn't love them.
Yeah, basically, all I needed to do was like talk to them to find out what was going on. But it's like the answer was like so simple, and I was like looking for a more complicated solution, and I didn't need one. It's like, no, it's really straightforward. It's really laid out for you there. So yeah, the interface is just really phenomenal on how it takes these big concepts like you're playing God and then you're managing a city and then also it's a top-down shooter. Like these are a lot of ideas that I imagine many other developers would have been like really racking their brains over, like how do we make all of this work? And like it looks super easy, but I mean the whole idea is that it probably wasn't easy. It probably was a huge endeavor to put that all together, but
Well, and
they
that's
managed it.
to expound on a point that I'd made in a previous recording. Is that there's beauty and simplicity, and it
Yeah,
seems like they nailed down the themes of this game and how they wanted to portray it, and then said, okay, here's these complicated issues. How do we boil that down into an experience that people are going to want to play? Because I
yeah,
mean, you got to imagine it's already kind of groundbreaking. It's innovative, but it's something new. You have to entice people with that,
right,
and you're
right.
dealing with the fact that it's playing like 3 separate games. So I mean, that's already going to it's a turn off. Like people are going to be apt to be wary of it, I should say. And so
Yeah,
to bring it in and to make it simple enough but to keep your interest is a difficult feat. And I
hmm,
admire the way that they did it, because I mean, just watching and talking about it has made me very, very interested in grabbing this game and playing through the whole thing just to experience it.
you get to play
And
as
like
God. I mean, what could be
exactly,
better?
just the summary of it just sounds fascinating. You get to play as a god, and these are the things you can control, and you get to play this statue thing, like whack the
Right.
crap out of whatever it is that you're fighting. Which
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
because oh, go ahead.
well, I mean, I was going to say it leads into the next point there, that you get to play as this statue god. Which,
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the statue has this real simplicity to it: jump, move, attack, and then you do have a magic spell that you can take with you, and you have a couple different ones you can choose between. And so it's really simple. It's similar to something like Castlevania, but I mean, it works in Castlevania, it works here. So many modern games just get really complicated with this, and they have so many controls. But if
well, it's
all
about
you
the
need,
experience at that point. This one was
yeah,
just, most of the time in that day and age, like we were spending so much time outside, or we had a bunch of activities. For us, we were in school and things. Like we were just trying to fit in wherever we could a video game, and that could have been a
hmm,
level, that could have been whatever problem faced you at the time. So like these were much more focused on just making sure that you had a game to play and it was something familiar so you could jump right back into it. Because
hmm,
it's pretty intuitive, obviously, and it doesn't need a whole bunch of complexity in order to give you the experience, because the
yeah,
experience, as we said, was very well conveyed through the gameplay and the interface and just the way that the game was designed. So, you get home from school, try and finish out your homework and your chores and stuff, and they jump into this, and you only have like an hour or two. But that was enough time to be able to do this stuff. And you didn't have to learn all these complexities like you'd have to in a game like, Hogwarts Legacy or Mass Effect or something.
right. As the statue, you are like quite literally a statue. Like you're stiff as a brick, and you can't move very well. I mean, you're kind of nimble, but for the most part, you are. Even like the way he like stands, and the way he's like swinging his sword. I dare I say like dogmatic or something that's just it's so deliberate. I think I was kind of numb to it because when I first played it, how much of this is intentional? Like, did they just design him to look that way because they thought that was like simplistic enough and that worked? But honestly, like, it does seem like it was deeper than that. It does seem like they deliberately were like, no, yeah, make him swing the sword just like in one strong motion and just cut something down and just be like,
Yeah, and it again, there's that beauty and simplicity, but there's also playing to your strengths, which I think that they did really well here. Because I
yeah,
imagine, you probably have a budget issue, and this is mostly speculation, but
yeah.
they're working within a budget, and then they're working within their own constraints of the time.
Because it came out so early in the lifespan, it was, near a launch
Mm.
title window. So I would imagine that's like, yep, you got to get that out as quick as possible because we need games to supply the Super Nintendo that's launching.
And it makes me wonder if that played into the decision there at the beginning, or maybe within the production itself. But
Mm.
he's standing there very statuesque. Like this is not a stance that would be natural within a regular sword
No.
fight, but that's how you play the whole game, is when you're running, you just kind of like holding it up in this weird fashion. And then he doesn't move. Like his back is straight as a rod, and he's like every jump, nothing on his body is any kind of natural, but it plays like it would if it was a statue, and it's
Right.
like
Yeah,
I
like
said, it's
if you
playing to their strengths and also maybe to their weaknesses.
well, to the theme for sure, because
That
and like
yeah,
Simon has a very like deliberate walk, and he can be pretty agile when he needs to be, but like not this guy. He's just not. You don't really get knocked back. You're really hard to stun. You just brute force your way back through. And I remember one of the things Corbett had mentioned was that you don't really have a lot of these regular advantages, but what you do have is a big fat HP bar. So basically, what you do is just
yeah, you
barrel
do.
through, and you're just screaming like "God coming through," and you're just like hacking and killing things up. And I just about
Which is
died
something
laughing
I
when you said
noticed because
that.
you're not super agile. Like when you come
No.
upon something, it's difficult to like jump over them or avoid them or whatever. So like inevitably, because a lot of these enemies seem like they're somewhat agile. Like you had these like snake
Yeah,
things in
yeah.
the desert,
Oh
and
yeah.
they shoot things and they're kind of whipping around, and it had that general rule back then where if you touch an enemy, obviously it hurts.
Right.
So you're either sliding into them because of the effects around you, the environment, or they're whipping towards you and you can't really get out of the way. So you're really just going in and you're taking at least 2 damage,
Mhm.
and then you're just wailing on them with your sword because you don't have a lot of range, but you could take quite a bit, and it doesn't. You like you said, it doesn't really stun you. There's not
Yeah.
a big pause whenever you get hit.
Right. Yeah, you're like unstoppable. Like it's just the inevitability is that no, you're going to win, but it's just a matter of just pushing through and just eradicating all of them. Although I will say I've heard that this game apparently has a new game plus mode, which I didn't know. Apparently it's just tough as nails. So I'm kind of curious to go back and play through it again on the harder difficulty and see what that experience is like cuz I mean the base experience it has a few tough moments, especially the end where you have to fight all the bosses in the game in a single boss rush mode. And so you've got to make, every hit point count there. But there's a number of bosses you can kind of cheese with one of the spells. You've got like this one spell that can call down like meteors, and that just
That's
obliterates
awesome.
pretty much anything. Oh yeah, it's
That's
fantastic.
how are you not going to have that in a game that you're a god though?
Right.
That's cool.
And then there's this last thing I want to say about the interface is there's these really nice transitions where you, after you see yourself like go down to the planet from your sky palace, it pulls into the side-scrolling perspective, and then you see that beam of light come down, which is presumably like your soul or your essence, and then it inhabits the statue's body, and then it gets colorized, it comes alive, and then you go through the stage, you kill everything, and then once you're done, the beam sends you back up into the sky again. So it's just a really nice, thoughtful way to like explain without like any words. Now you are sending your essence down to control this entity. Okay, now that task is done, you're going back up, so you can see things from that global perspective. So, yeah, just really, really thoughtful design all around.
And very thematic, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, it really gets you energized because he's got like the sword in the air, and then you like shoot your essence down, and you just like you strike it basically, and then you're like, all right. As opposed to have you just like imagine if it was just like sitting there and then just like flickered to life. Like that would be so mundane. It wouldn't have the same energy as
Be generic for sure, yeah.
this is what's happening. It looks like this. And so, yeah, really, really great interface.
Well, with that, should we jump to narrative composition?
Let's do it.
So we've already gone over a little bit of this, but I'll read kind of what we had from Corbett's notes. So to set the stage of what this game's about, in ActRaiser, you play as a benevolent deity, mostly benevolent, obviously, seeking to retake a world that has been conquered by demons. In between your demon-slaying dungeon crawls, you will help manage civilizations. In so doing, you will encourage humanity to survive and thrive in the process. And in addition, you will hear little story vignettes of the people in your civilization, which will help you empathize with them and understand the relationship you have with them. So to summarize, in maybe not so elegant of fashion, an eternity in the life of a god. So you get to experience, as we had mentioned earlier, just kind of how a deity would experience his creation
Yeah.
In a very detached manner. But at the same time, you're saving them from demons and bouts of drought and famine and whatever else. It's a very very interesting way of looking at it from this 1991 video game.
Yeah. Yeah, to kind of follow up with another point he made, he said over the course of the game will encourage you to care for the civilization's inhabitants, not for any extrinsic reward, but because you care about their little pixelated selves and want them to thrive. There are little story vignettes from the villagers, and they work decently well on their own, but they mostly thrive in how they encourage you to care for the villagers. So the villagers, so they like give you offerings and stuff just to like show their appreciation of you or whatever. I'm like dismissing that. I'm like, it's whatever. They're making a sacrifice, but whatever. I'm a god, so it doesn't matter. But like at some point, they're kind of helpful, but then after a while, the items they're giving you, you're like, all right, I don't really need this anymore, and so it's for them, right? For their like satisfaction that you like accept it, and so they know that like
acknowledge that you're their deity.
Yeah. I don't know that we're going to have too much to say that's not going to be in spoiler territory. So to kind of sum up, what I will just say in terms of the structure of the narrative. In terms of the structure of the narrative, each location or like each province, you go down, you kill all the monsters, and then you talk to your people, and you kind of help construct the land, and you're killing the demons to kind of eradicate the last few layers. And you're in constant conversation with them. Like periodically, the cherub will be like, "Oh, like your people have something they need to say," and you're like, "Okay." So it'll interrupt the game, it'll pull you in, and then they'll describe what's going on. And sometimes they like need you for something, or they have like intel on like where a monster lair might be. They're like, "Oh, we think it might be over here, but we don't know what to do about it." And then you pull out, and you're like, "Okay, wait a minute. There's like some boulders or trees there," and you're like, "What if I just like strike lightning and burn it down?" And so you kind of figure out like, okay, that's what we do. And then it is revealed, and you're like, oh, okay, yep, go get rid of those monsters. And so you send the people out there, and so you kind of have back and forth relationship with them growing in the province. And then at some point, they will tell you that like, oh, okay, we're doing okay here. We're safe and we're taking care of ourselves. You should go to other areas and take care of people there. And so then you transition out, you go to the next province, and the cycle sort of repeats itself. But the crazy thing, and this is now going to be your final spoiler warning, because you actually get to have them interact, the different provinces, with one another. So in one of them, a man gets entranced by magical power from a monster's lair and searches for it in the desert. But he dies tragically. And while he's out there, his city is mourning for him, and they invent music. So they play this bittersweet melody to kind of like soothe their souls. And then a different civilization is currently fighting among themselves due to working too hard, and they're just kind of becoming bitter and selfish and stressed. And so what you do is you take the music you got from the one province and you take it over there and you play it for them. And it's a kind of cool, like the healing power of music takes over. But it's just like a nice, thoughtful way of how you, like one civilization creates technology or art or something like that. And then you take it and you bridge these different people groups. So it's just kind of a nice sentiment.
Yeah, that's very innovative, and it's very interesting. It's something that kind of pulls you into the world. It's a good way of doing it in a detached manner, like a deity would. Something that he could see, almost like a butterfly effect type thing that you wouldn't see from the ground, as it were. And
like they're just fighting, and they're stuck in this stupor, and they don't really know how to like solve it. But then like you come in and intervene with something really powerful, and then they're like, oh wow. And so it's just kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, and he had a second example about a kid named Teddy. Teddy gets lost, and obviously his town people are very worried about him. So you go help find him, and you save him from starving to death, and you send him back home. So this Teddy then grows up to be kind of heroic, and he discovers the source of a poisoned water and gives you an offering. But then a monster comes down on this town and demands sacrifice from the townsfolk. So basically, Teddy offers himself up, or he rigs this test in order to get chosen, so that his mom isn't chosen. So it's like a early Hunger Games kind of thing. He offered himself as tribute. But obviously, you're the deity, so you come down and rescue him and slay the monster. Corbett says that he wishes that they let him stay dead, as it'd make a better story.
I agree.
Words, but well,
Teddy must die.
You are the benevolent deity. You must save him from the evil monster. So that didn't happen.
Yeah, I wonder if they felt like that was just too dark. I don't know. Teddy was a character that always bothered me because it's just like his whole province is just so unnecessarily concerned about him. I mean, I get like he wanders off and whatnot, but it's just like, kid, just stay at home. Like, what are you doing? Well, there's a lot going on.
He has a death wish, and apparently it's been there forever. He tries to wander off and kill himself, doesn't work out, so he just is like, all right, fine, this monster will do it. Surprised he didn't just drink the poison water.
I feel like everybody who likes Teddy is like, no, don't say these words.
Poor Teddy. He's going to die someday.
Well, I mean, we have that deity perspective. Look at how as this conversation goes on, we become more and more detached from the people.
Yeah, the game is doing its work without us playing it. Maybe Teddy will be the part of the sequel. It'll be ActRaiser 2, Teddy Arises, or something. I don't know.
So there actually is an ActRaiser 2.
Oh, no.
And it is called Teddy Arises. No, it's not called Teddy Arises. It's just ActRaiser 2. I've not played that one. I do know that it notoriously removed the SimCity like building portions of the game, so it's just a side-scrolling action game, which doesn't
run out of money or something.
I think it was more that Enix was less interested in that, and they felt like the first one didn't do maybe well enough, and so they said, okay, keep this. You can do a second one, but just keep the side-scrolling action. That'll be more appealing to most people. Never mind this like sim building nonsense. That's my guess is what probably happened. Mostly what Quintet goes on to do are games that they're like entirely self-contained. Like some of their other games are like Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, Terranigma. So they're all like independent, but those three games are actually like loosely connected to one another. And so there's an impression that they kind of saw them almost as like in speaking of the same universe or being connected in some way. But by changing the name, it gives them more freedom. Whereas like when they called it ActRaiser 2, I'm wondering if they were just like, oh shoot, that was kind of a mistake, because then it meant that we had to kind of like, we couldn't just do it the way that we wanted, like the original.
Yeah, you set a standard and then you didn't meet it.
Well, I don't think that they couldn't. I think it was more just they probably weren't allowed to explore with that, because it's like, if we're gonna okay an ActRaiser 2, that first one didn't do so well, so we want to see some changes to make sure that it does better, which is, of course, the best way to inspire a creative group of people to work on a project. So I don't know if that was the case. I might be, throwing Enix under the rug here or under the bus here for no reason, but that would be my guess as to what happened, because all of their games, or at least all the ones I've played this one, and I've played Illusion of Gaia, and Illusion of Gaia is incredible. I mean, that game's a masterpiece. It's super artistic, and there's nothing like it. I mean, the same goes for ActRaiser. Like, there's nothing like their games. So if they were doing ActRaiser 2, it does make me wonder where kind of that one lies. But that'll be a conversation for the future, I think.
Okay.
So is there anything else we wanted to mention for the story, or perhaps in general?
Nothing that I can think of. I think I've exhausted my commentary. What about you?
So I think I'll have one more comment from Corbett here to kind of summarize our thoughts on the narrative composition. He says that after your cherub friend ponders on the development of the civilizations you've worked with, this is at the end of the game, and what they're up to now, it's revealed that the civilizations have become independent and have no further need of you. So you accomplished your goal, but it means you no longer get to continue to have the connections that you've forged over the course of the game. Despite this, it is phrased as a good thing for this to happen. So it leaves you with an impression of the merits and sacrifices of the selfless love that the game has encouraged you to cultivate throughout the game. And I think that's a really good, apropos way to kind of surmise, or a really appropriate way to surmise the experience of the premise.
Any kind of experience, or he explains it as like this melancholy kind of, because the game sets it up as this is something that you crave and that you need, and that it's a symbiotic relationship where you're helping them succeed, and then one day you have to let them go, and that's this odd ending to, I guess it is a full circle type of thing, but you work so hard to get to this end goal, and then it's like, oh, I guess the end goal is different than I expected.
Well, I mean, and that's like the funny thing is like, what would you expect? It's almost like you're expecting more, maybe like intimacy, I would think, but like your deity is to like your job, your role in this is to help build up the civilization and like protect them and give them like guidance and all these things, and you do that. And so it's very much like the journey is the reward. Like you got them to where they need to be, and then you kind of part ways, or you go to like new civilizations, or we find out what happens in ActRaiser 2.
And that's what we're missing. We haven't played it.
So let's talk a little bit about its nomination for Best Pixel then. So Corbett has a couple points here. I'll just read over real quick. In his view, ActRaiser is a bit weak in the other categories, but it still does an okay job at accomplishing them. Yeah, I would kind of agree with that sentiment. It's not like the art is like bad or anything, or that the gameplay is boring. It's not any of those things. I think it did get overshadowed by the competition. But like I said, the positions ActRaiser is holding, it's holding very well. Like it has a lot of points in them, especially for direction. So that's kind of interesting to see that like among the games with low nomination counts, this is the one where I actually think it actually is holding pretty good territory so far, but I mean, we'll have to see. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that it does have a really good musical score. Musical score is going to be notoriously competitive for us, but that doesn't mean we didn't like it. It is a really great score. It has that Camelot feel to it, which is fantastic.
It's a very cheesy, classical fantasy feel. And I think it accomplishes that in more than just the music, which is always going to just resonate with me. It's something that inspired me when I was a kid. It's something that just kind of stuck with me even now. But it's one of those things that just it awakens something in you that just kind of is, I don't know, it's almost irresistible in that way. It has a charm. And it does that in a lot of different ways. Like you were saying, the art can be fairly generic, and certain things about it maybe don't shine as much as it could, but at the same time, there's enough to it to make it very interesting to stand out to, I think, most of the people that experienced it, at least in our circle. From afar, it was easily the most interesting one that I saw. And it was a good list of games. Like there was a lot that I enjoyed there, but this one really stood out as interesting on a number of levels, I think is why.
Yeah, it's so layered in all the things that it's doing. It really does shine among the competition, which is really interesting because I think, a lot of people, they know, like, everybody knows Link to the Past, Super Mario World, F-Zero, but like ActRaiser is really good. It's in the same quality as those games, I would argue. I think it's fantastic. It's a really phenomenal experience.
Perhaps underrated is a good term for it.
Yeah. It's almost like it was a niche title when it came out because it's so just different than everything that you would experience. But it handles everything smoothly. Like, I don't know if there was something I could ask it to do, I don't think I would. I kind of like the way that it's set up, and I think if you were to tamper with it, it would just be less intuitive, or it would be adding extra layers that aren't necessary. So yeah, and that's kind of like something that Corbett echoes as well. He says that like the thing that ActRaiser does best is its cohesiveness, direction, and unique concept. It feels like a game with many disparate parts, which all add together to create the experience of making the player feel like a selflessly loving god, which is not an experience that I expected to have in a game. If you want a game that starts with an intriguing concept and builds many different aspects of video games around conveying it, then ActRaiser is the game for you.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it pretty well.
Yeah. So, the last thing I think my final point for a nomination for Best Pixel, ActRaiser is kind of a special one in that playing God is often synonymous with playing video games for a lot of people, where they'll be like, oh, it's like you get to play God, or you get to like make whatever you want happen, or you're in total control over a situation. And in this game, you quite literally are God, and so that's the part that's so hilarious to it, is you get to play that deity and you get to live out that fantasy. I myself feel more like games are actually way more constraining to that. It's like you're more about getting like a participatory movie. That's how I view them. But I do think it's worth mentioning because I know for a lot of people they're like, oh, that like sense of I can see everything and I'm in control of everything and I get to decide how I want narratives to play out and so on. So ActRaiser is a really unique gem that accomplishes that goal really well.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting way to view that philosophy because it actually leans into it and then it tries to portray it in a way that's different than other video games to kind of show you that maybe those other video games aren't so much like playing God as this one where you actually do. And it does a really good job, even though it is very on the nose with a lot of its themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're curious to play ActRaiser yourself, there's always the Super Nintendo version, but there's also a 2021 remaster entitled ActRaiser Renaissance. It's on Nintendo Switch, PS4, and PC, and it features new mechanics and fancy graphics. So if you're interested, you can check that one out. I've not played that one myself, but I've heard kind of mixed things. I heard some people really liked it, some people felt like it was really different. So, but it's an option. Thank you, Tyler, for joining me. This was fun. This actually was a lot longer conversation than I expected, but I think it was worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was worth talking about. Like I said, it stood out. It was special. It was a good game.
Yeah. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. ActRaiser is up for Best Pixel, Best Direction, Best Interface, and Best Narrative Composition at this year's Oscarinas. If you're a voter, I hope you'll consider it, and if you're a viewer, let us know how you think it will perform. We can look forward to seeing the winners at the awards ceremony this October. And if ActRaiser wins Best Pixel, it will symbolically represent the very artistry of what makes games art through player, avatar, and world interactivity.